We have a vision to be an international university of choice, anchored in Africa, dynamically shaping the future. Our mission is to inspire our community to transform and serve humanity through innovation and the collaborative pursuit of knowledge. To fully embrace the digital universe which we are beginning to inhabit, this is what we do at the University of Johannesburg. UJ, where the whole is far greater than the sum of its parts.
Our next speaker is Erik Kruger. You've heard me already refer to him, and we are delighted to have you, Erik, join us this morning. And Erik is a speaker, author, and thinking partner to many executives. He is the founder of Modern Breed, and I'm sure is going to help us think about leadership during crisis and the world of tomorrow that we can't yet imagine.
Thank you very much, Prof. Good morning, everyone. I hope that you are off to a flying start this morning. Thanks to you, Jay, I recently had the privilege of delivering my very first TEDx talk about shaping the future. And I wanted to share one of the stories from that talk with you this morning. A man in Baghdad once sent one of his servants to the marketplace to find food and drink for guests that would be arriving later in the day. Whilst at the bar, he ordered a drink, and in a moment of shock, he realized that sitting across from him, staring at him, was a stranger, and that stranger was death herself. So he rushed out of the bar and back to the house. He told his boss about this, and he asked if he could use one of the many horses that they owned to go to Samara, a place far enough away so that death couldn't find him there. His boss agreed, and he jumped on the horse. He rode and he rode until he finally arrived in Samara. He checked into an inn, entered his room, closed the door, turned around, and there in the corner waiting for him was death. So death, seeing the surprise and the horror on the man's face, said to him, "Well, you think you are surprised? Just imagine my confusion this morning when I saw you in the bar in Baghdad, and I knew I had an appointment with you tonight here in Samara." So this is obviously a short tale about inevitability, and specifically the inevitability of death. But I also think it's a great way of thinking about the inevitability of the future. Because no matter what you do, you cannot escape the future. No matter how much you want to ride to get to Samara, there's no way to escape the change that is coming. And so whether we like it or not, artificial intelligence will keep rising, making many jobs redundant. Whether you like it or not, online tuition becomes more and more popular. And whether you like it or not, the skills that you need for the future might not match the skills that you currently have. And so when faced with this daunting future, the question that we love to ask ourselves is, how do we prepare for it? And I think that the answer lies not as much in preparing for the future as it is in becoming the future. So the future is not a math test that we prepare for. It's not a puzzle that gets solved in a systematic way. It's just too complex and unpredictable. So what does it mean if I say we have to become the future? We already have quite an intuitive feel for this, if you think about it. When we look at younger generations, we often say to them, "You are the future." And we say that mostly because of their age, because we know that literally they're going to grow up and they're going to be the next generation. But also we look at the way that they treat technology and we say, well, you are the future. So I want you to think for a moment, which qualities would someone have to see in you to say, you are the future? If we put age aside for a moment, which behaviors and mindsets would qualify you for that statement? There's a version of you that exists in the future, that copes just fine with constant change, that has all the skills necessary to be successful. And I believe it's your job to become that version of you. Leonard Sweet said that the future is not something we enter, the future is something we create. And we create it, in my opinion, by creating ourselves. And so one of the best ways to do this is by defining mental models that will help us in the creation process. So Ben Hunt Davis was the captain of the British national rowing team. And in 1998, they were really having a hard time. They were battling to get momentum going. And so he devised this question, this mental model that says, will it make the boat go faster? And this became the focusing question, the focusing mental model for the entire team. And so what this meant is that when you sit down at a restaurant and you're about to order something to eat, you see the burger and chips and you're like, I really want that. But you ask yourself the question, will it make the boat go faster? And you realize, well, perhaps not. And so you opt for something healthier to eat. Same goes for when you're sitting on the rowing machine and you've been rowing for 90 minutes straight and you are hating life and you want to quit. And you think, well, is this making the boat go faster? And if the answer is yes, it means you keep going. You keep doing the thing that's making the boat go faster. And of course, it wouldn't be a great story if it didn't end with the British Olympic rowing team taking gold at the 2000 Olympics, because that's exactly what happened. So there's real power in a question, a mental model that helps us to focus on the right thing. And so what I would love to do this morning is to share with you 5 different mental models that I believe will help you to focus on the right thing. And the right thing being you becoming the future. So the very first one that I'd like to chat to you about is becoming a deep thinker. I think you'll agree with me that we are oversubscribed. We are engaging with more content than ever before. I just recently learned that there are more than 40,000 search queries on Google every second, and that the Facebook like button has been pressed 13 trillion times. And each day we see 682 million tweets going into the Twitterverse. It's given rise to a phenomenon that I like to call thinking in glances. And what this means is that we just glance at information, potentially life-changing ideas and principles. We glance at it and then we just move on again with our lives. We think in that moment that learning has happened because the information is fresh in our mind. But truth be told, we pretty much forget it soon afterwards because it gets pushed down by other content. And more than that, it doesn't translate to how we think and behave, which is really the ultimate litmus test for whether learning has happened. And so what we are losing in this process, in this oversubscribed world, is the ability to sit with ourselves and our own thinking. A recent New York Times article showcased research that found that we can only sit with our own thinking for about 6 to 15 minutes before we feel the need to distract ourselves. Think about that. 6 to 15 minutes. A different research study said that deep thinking is a key ingredient for success, and we know this. But they also called it an endangered species. And so what it means is that if we are always just thinking in glances, we rarely spend enough time to fully apply new concepts and ideas to our lives. We never slow down new patterns. And I think it's been especially true for the last few months of firefighting, for the reactive state that we've been in. But it's important that we create the space for deep thinking. Because thinking in glances is like looking at pictures of the Colosseum, whereas deep thinking is like visiting it and experiencing the magnificence of it. Thinking in glances is like reading food reviews, and deep thinking is like tasting the food and savoring the moment. I run a program called Think Week, and we take people through all these different ideas and filters and ask them to reflect on what's happening for them internally when they go through the process. And we only give them 4 minutes to do that, 4 minutes to reflect. And it has been astonishing to see the insight that people generate when they have 4 minutes of uninterrupted, deep thinking. And so I can't help but wonder what happens if we actually have an hour each day that we can dedicate to our thinking. time to think about who we are and who we want to become. What's been even more interesting is that we just don't prioritize ourselves. We don't create the time for ourselves because everyone else and everything else gets prioritized. And so the very important first takeaway for you from this part about deep thinking is that we have to create time in our day to really slow down and to think about who we are, where we are going, and who we are becoming. One of the conclusions that I hope you come to as you then start doing some really deep thinking is that you want to become dangerous again. If this has you a bit shocked and you are paying close attention, then that's really good. Let me say up front that being dangerous obviously has nothing to do with inflicting harm on anybody. The world has a very negative connotation to the word dangerous for obvious reasons. But I want you to think differently about it today. I want you to be open-minded about this. When Tiger Woods walks onto the golf course, people look at him and they say, he is dangerous. Not because he's going to take a club to someone's face, but because we know that he has a certain set of skills and abilities and a way of thinking about the game that makes him a threat to the other players. When you look at your competitors, you might think they are dangerous, not because you think they might key your car at night, but because you know they have the potential to disrupt your industry, or that they might even be more appealing to your customers than what you are. So up front here, you can start seeing that being dangerous is about your stance towards the world, about how you think, how you feel, and how you act. But perhaps the best way for me to explain it is actually to start with its origins. So this idea emerged for me early last year when I was working with many individual coaching clients. And I started realizing that so many of my clients were stuck in survival mode, in mental survival mode. And when you are in survival mode, there are three things that are quite obvious. The first is that you become very reactive to your environment, meaning you are going through your day just putting out fires. You are just trying to get to the end of the day. And my clients would tell me, I'm busy future-proofing myself. I'm working on who I'm becoming. Yet when we looked at what was happening in their day, we realized that there was none of that. They were doing nothing today, preparing them for tomorrow. The second thing happening in survival mode is that you operate from a place of anxiety, fear, and frustration. And when this happens, there are these two distortions that appear. The first is the distortion of probability, and the second is the distortion of severity. And what happens is that you start thinking that things are going to go wrong all the time, probability, and when things do go wrong, it's going to be catastrophic. And so what do you think happens when you are always thinking things are going to go wrong, and when they do go wrong, it's going to be catastrophic? What happens is that you withdraw, you contract. You are too afraid to go and do things because you fear what the consequences might be. And so this brings us to the third thing that happens in survival mode. And that is that the things we do in survival mode keep us in survival mode. And that's quite obvious because the things that you are inherently good at, the things that you might do, the risk that you might take, the skill that you might apply that could change the situation, those are the things you stop doing. And so all of this leads us to someone who, if they are brutally honest with themselves, if they've been in survival mode for long enough, start realizing that they are pretty harmless, that they're not feeling confident. They don't feel like they can make an impact, like they can alter their destiny. They become riddled with self-doubt. If you find yourself there this morning, I want you to know that it's quite okay. That it happens pretty often that I speak about this and people see themselves in this. And if you find yourself in survival mode, it's quite okay to be there because we've been going through a pandemic. And the pandemic has knocked most people squarely back into survival mode. The advantage that you have is that at least you know you are in survival mode. And so it's okay to find yourself there. It's just not okay to stay there. Being dangerous means that you know you can make an impact, that you trust in your ability, that you are in flow, that you are sharp, that you are focused. It means that there are certain skills that you can apply and certain risks that you should take. There are things that you can do that can change your situation. When you are dangerous, you do something instead of doing nothing. And my sense is that most people intuitively get what I mean when I speak about this idea of being dangerous. And the reason for that is that they felt like this before. There was a time when they felt really alive, when they felt like they were playing at the top of their game. And so what I really hope that you get from this is the desire to be dangerous again. Because when you access that something that's dormant in you at the moment, when you are dangerous again, you are creating your future, but not based on fear, not from a place of survival mode. So you have to sit with the idea and the reflection. Are you harmless or are you being dangerous? There's a great story about Baker Mayfield. He's the quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, a national American football team. And he had this phenomenal game one Sunday, led his team to victory. Everyone was super impressed with his performance. And in the post-match interview, they said to him, what happened for you in the day? Like, what happened that you ended up playing so well? And he said, I woke up this morning feeling pretty dangerous. And that's what I want for all of us. That survival mode is not good enough. That we have to wake up in the mornings feeling dangerous and ready to go into the future, ready to move into the future. What this then means, as you have this awareness where you are on the scale, like no matter where you are, you can always become more dangerous. And so to go from a 5 out of 10 to a 6 out of 10 or a 6 to a 7 or a 7 to an 8 means that you must change. But it also means we should become more intentional with our change. Because too often we get caught up in the change itself and we forget to focus on the process of change. So here's what I see. We find ourselves in autopilot, in survival mode. At some point, inspiration strikes and we want to make a change. We jump into the change, we commit to it, we move pretty quickly. And then 3 or 4 days later, we find ourselves back exactly where we started. So what happened here? Well, for one thing, we probably rushed into the change. But for sure, what we didn't do is we didn't think through how we are going to sustain change. For many years, I worked as a physiotherapist. And I spent some of my career in intensive care units. I was also head of rehab for a step-down facility. And during that time, we saw patients come in all the time who suffered a heart attack. And it was very interesting for me to see how these different patterns emerged in how the patients recovered. So the one type of patient would have the heart attack, they'd get into ICU, and while they were still lying there, they'd say to us, will you please take me outside for a smoke? And so you'd have to undo their drips and their central line, SATs, monitors, ECG, and then get them into a wheelchair, and they would want to go and have a smoke. And the first time it happened, I was just so blown away that this lifestyle habit probably contributed to where you find yourself, yet you were unwilling to make a change. The second type of patient would get into ICU, and they would pretty much overnight overhaul their entire life. They'd immediately deepen relationships with friends and family. They'd give up poor lifestyle habits. They'd start exercising as soon as they could. And what they showed me time and time again is that change, instant change, is possible. That change is actually the easy part here. But what's difficult is sustaining the change. You can get off this session today with me and immediately be more dangerous. You can get off the session today and immediately change an attitude, a mindset, a behavior. That's the easy part. But how do we sustain that change? I believe we can do that by improve the chance of the likelihood of us succeeding by activating certain preconditions. So about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we got our first pup, and his name was Axel. His name is Axel. He's still here. And we immediately put him into like puppy training school. And then when he got a bit bigger, he went to play with the big boys. But the trainer, when we were still going through puppy school, really taught me a lot about human nature and about just behavior change and conditioning in general. And the one thing she said to us over and over again is that you have to set your dog up for success. And so what does this mean? It means that if you're trying to teach them how to sit, don't take them to the park where there are other dogs and balls and smells. Bring him to your house, into a room where there aren't many distractions, where it's easy for him to focus on you, easy for him to succeed in the task that you are giving him. And so I really want us to start asking that question for ourselves too. How are you setting yourself up for success? Which conditions can you put in place beforehand that increases the likelihood of you changing down the road? So that's what a precondition is. It's something that supports the process of change. And you've actually done this many times before. Whenever you've changed successfully, there were certain ingredients that were present. You might have asked an accountability partner to keep you on task, or you might have created some real clarity for yourself about the goal, or you might have fleshed out the details of the change. I'm not going to take you through a whole list of the preconditions because it's not important to know what are all the things. What's more important to know is what specifically helps you to change. And the only way to really get to that answer is to go back and do a bit of a revision of where you've changed successfully in the past and which conditions were present that helped you to sustain change. I know that for me, when I wanted to start waking up at 5 a.m. in the morning, I got an accountability partner. And every single morning, we would make sure that the other person was awake. And that helped me to sustain the change. Recently, I decided to become more prolific in my writing, to increase the caliber of my writing. And so I hired a coach. And I knew that having a coach is going to help me sustain the change, not because of accountability, but because it's going to help me improve my learning. It's going to help me stay focused. And so what I want you to do is to slow down, deep thinking, and to start by thinking, is the change that I'm trying to make actually a change that I want? Because very often we look around us and we see a change that a friend has made and we think we should be doing that too. But second of all, before you make the change, before you jump into it, I want you to consider how you will sustain that change. Which conditions can you activate beforehand that will help you to sustain the change? As we then start changing more successfully, because that's the one of the pitfalls we might run into here, is that we are always changing and falling back and changing and falling back. And sure, there's value in learning from failure, but at some point it just becomes wasted time and effort when you could have actually done a better job up front of changing. As we then start changing, the one thing that happens in the process is that we are learning. And so this phrase, ultra learning, has been stuck in my head now for quite a bit of time. And I learned it from a book called Ultra Learning by Scott Young. And obviously what it speaks to is this idea of rapid skill acquisition. But it's not just skill, it's learning new mindsets, new behaviors, new knowledge. Ultra learning is three things. First of all, it's a strategy, meaning that we engage in ultra learning, rapid skill or mindset acquisition. Why? Because it's the solution to a problem. And I think many people have seen the value of this over the past few months, that you can see that I need this skill to be relevant in the future. And so therefore, I'm going to start learning it today. That also then brings to the second aspect of ultra learning, which is that ultra learning is always self-directed. There's a very specific reason why I'm trying to learn this, and it's my decision. I'm driving the fact that I want to learn this. And thirdly, and this is maybe the most important one that I want to get across here, is that ultra learning is intense. It's about learning very quickly and very effectively and with great efficiency. But it's an intense process, and it's supposed to be intense. You know why? Because research has shown that our skills are depreciating. That in the half-life of a new skill that you learn is 5 years. So it means if you learn a new skill today, 5 years from now, it's either redundant, outdated, or just not relevant. And so what we know is how we lead teams 5 years from now will be quite different to how we are leading our teams today. How you sell might be quite different. How we build businesses might be quite different. And what I really want to drive home here is that we often mistake consumption for learning. And that a new skill or new knowledge is earned. I feel like we've kind of forgotten that. Because we are going through our day randomly consuming a lot of content. But I don't feel like we're earning new skill or earning a new mindset. Because listening to a podcast on your commute is quite easy. And there's value in that it's easy. But is it enough? Does it translate to how you think and how you behave? I made a post on LinkedIn the other day saying this idea of earning new skills, mindsets, behaviors is so important. Like we shouldn't just listen to a podcast. We should take notes on it. And we shouldn't just take notes on it. We should think of how do we apply this into our lives and into our businesses. And we shouldn't just think of how we apply it. We should go and do it and apply it. What I've noticed for myself is that whenever I'm busy with a new keynote, it takes me about 4 to 6 weeks to put it together. And in that time, I'm so focused on the topic that I'm working on that by the time I'm done with it, when I'm presenting the keynote, I'm levels deep in my understanding of that topic. I have done a ton of research around it. I've looked for all the best resources, and I'm much better at applying it into different situations and scenarios. And so I started challenging my clients to do the same thing, to create what I call a plan for learning for themselves. A plan for learning means that I engage in ultra learning. I identify a skill, a mindset I want to learn, and I go about doing it in a very intentional way. So there's 4 components. What will I learn? What will I use? What is the time frame? And how will I test it? So what will I learn? Meaning you identify the skill or the mindset or the behavior. What will I use? And I think this is a fun part of the process, is that you get to spend a day or two and you do your research. You go and look for the best books, the best blogs, the best podcast episodes, the best YouTube videos. And then you create your own curriculum that you can follow over the next couple of weeks or the next couple of months. The third aspect is, what is the time frame? So that's completely up to you. Do you want to do it every single month, try and learn something like a new skill, or every single quarter? Like, what does that look like for you? And then finally is, how will I test it? How will I know that I've applied this into the way that I think and into the way that I behave? So this is where we've come to. We've said that one of the most important things that we can cultivate is the ability to think deeply about who we are and who we are becoming, where we are and where we want to go. And that one of the realizations we might have if we are slowing down and thinking a bit about where we find ourselves, that we might find ourselves in survival mode. And that we don't want to be in survival mode. If anything, we want to be dangerous. We want to be moving. We want to be doing things. We want to feel alive. We want to feel excited about the work that we get to do. We want to keep moving forward. And that means that we have to become dangerous. But being dangerous, becoming more dangerous, is a very intentional process. It means you have to change. It means you can't stay stagnant. If you're never challenging the status quo, then you're harmless. You're in survival mode. Being dangerous is exactly that, is stepping beyond the status quo. Being dangerous means that we are always changing. We are staying relevant. In fact, we are setting the pace. And so we are always changing, and it's important to then think not only of the change, but how do we sustain that change? And how do we sustain that change by activating certain preconditions that set us up for success? And that change ultimately means we are learning. We are learning new things, but we can't just have that be a random process. We need to drive it, and driving it means that we create a plan for learning that says, I've identified the skill I want to learn, I've identified the best resources, I'm creating my own curriculum, and off I go. I'm actually seeing it manifest in my life. The things that I'm learning is manifesting in my life. The final thing then to keep in mind is that that entire process, all of that happens in a world that is prone to disruption, that is chaotic, that has a lot of things happening all the time. And so it's really important that we also focus and cultivate strategic resilience. Resilience has really been the battle cry for the pandemic. And it makes sense. It makes sense. It's a trait that helps us to survive dark times, that provides us with hope. And we've really been bombarded with countless articles of what it takes to be resilient. I'm pretty sure if I had to test you on this, you'll know that to be resilient means spend time with people who lift you up, make sure that you're feeling recharged, and work on the ability to reframe the negative as a positive. But resilience has a dark side too. And understanding it, I think, is actually quite useful. Because very often being resilient means that you are being a punching bag. And this is how many people approach it, as a goal in itself, thinking that resilience will aid them in moving forward, yet one day they wake up to realize that they are still hanging in exactly the same place and proudly just weathering the punches being thrown at them. So is it possible that a dogmatic determination to be more resilient could get in the way of you becoming and building something greater? And it turns out that the answer is yes. A study in the Journal of Child Development said that some people are genetically more predisposed to be resilient, but that this resiliency, this immunity, was actually towards good and bad experiences, meaning that the people who have this predisposition are resilient irrespective of what's happening. They remain unchanged and unfazed, no matter their situation. So they're not learning from hardship. They're not growing from experience. And this brings me to something I invite you to consider. Are you sacrificing growth or evolution for resiliency? And of course, I know that these aren't mutually exclusive, but it's possible that you might be optimizing for one and neglecting the other. One of the core tenets of resiliency is the idea that we bounce back, that we return to how things once were, that no matter how much life stretches you, you return back to your normal shape in the same way that a spring always bounces back to the shape it had before. But of course, you are not a spring. And perhaps life is not about bouncing back, but moving forward as we accumulate bruises and cracks and as we evolve and morph and change shape. The myth of the phoenix is held up as this shining example of what it means to be resilient. Because according to mythology, the phoenix is this stunning bird that when it reaches an old age, just goes up in flames. And all that remains are its ashes. And then from the ashes, the phoenix rises again. So from the debris, we see new life, and from decimation, opportunity. The tale itself is very motivational and triumphant in nature, which is what I think we really aspire to when we talk about resilience. It's not really about the bouncing back, but about the banishing of evil, the overcoming of obstacles, and emerging as the victor on the other end. And so Nassim Taleb wrote in his book, Anti-Fragile, that the problem facing the phoenix is that it always returns to the state it was in before. It never evolves. It never comes back stronger. It's doomed to repeat the cycle of flames and birth for eternity, caught in what I call the trap of resilience. And so resilience is important, but there are a few nuances that we should consider. So the first is that if resilience is about bouncing back to a previous state, we should really stop to evaluate, so deep thinking, whether this is a state that we actually want. This prevents us from getting stuck in the resilience trap and avoiding the fate of the phoenix. Number 2 is that resilience becomes a massive problem when it makes us tolerant of adversity or poor behaviors. And we see this in the business world all the time. I spoke to an executive last week who told me that for years now, he has felt undervalued by his organization and is never treated with the respect he deserves. And of course, this frustrates him endlessly. But he's resilient. So he just rolls the punches and never does anything about it. 3, research has shown that leadership effectiveness might actually be impaired by too much resilience. Why? Because we get so focused on getting through the challenge at all costs that we become less self-aware of where our behavior might be impacting those around us. It's like we just put on blinkers and just charge ahead. Number 4, too much resilience can warp your idea of what stress is. High levels of stress become such a normal part of your day that you are unaware of the toll that it's taking on your physiology and psychology. And of course, what does this lead us to? Burnout and a lack of self-care. Number 5, one more to go. Blind resilience means that we often protect things that should be allowed to burn to the ground. Catastrophe is a great catalyst for change. And we've seen this over the past few months, that when things break down, we can build it up into something new. But if you are too resilient, you might never reach that inflection point, a point where it's painful enough for you to change. For the years that I worked in that step down and worked with the heart attack patients and the hip replacement patients, I saw it over and over again, that we will sustain our bad habits, our poor lifestyle choices until the heart attack. And then we change. And so finally, resilience only really makes sense if at the same time we are moving and evolving, leaving behind that which doesn't make sense anymore, and in the process becoming something else. Nassim Taleb calls this anti-fragility. The idea that we can get stronger and become better through adversity and the challenges that we face. And personally, over the past few months, the call to action of being anti-fragile has been really important in my life. And so resilience can often feel like a reminder that says, I will get through this. Whereas growth and anti-fragility says, how will you grow through this? So that brings us to the end, and I hope that I was on time. The challenge really coming out of today's session is for you to be more intentional with the mental models that you use to create your future. It doesn't have to be the ones that I shared. I think they provide great direction. I think that if I saw any of these in you, I would say that you are the future. But more than anything, I just want you to be intentional in how you go about creating your own future. Thank you.
Erik, thank you so much. That was very, very inspiring, and you've given us a lot to think with. I'm going to kick off the questions by asking Prof. Jure and you, Erik, the same question. And you've both alluded to online learning and the place of online learning in the future. And perhaps, Prof. Jure, we can start with you. You talked quite a lot about the online learning space in your university. Do you think that this is something that's going to grow more? Are we going to have sort of hybrid blended versions of face-to-face and online? And what do you think might be the pros and cons? Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Thank you for that. We had to, of course, respond, as I said, to the pandemic by moving online. That was we didn't have any choice. But for the new academic year, which is going to start on 28th of September, we have decided that 50% of all our programs will move to the blended mode. That is something that is not just a result of the pandemic. This is where I wanted to stress a little bit more, to say that this blended mode is something that is encouraged, has been encouraged. So much of work, so much of research has been conducted where we find that the blended mode adds a lot to the students. So I'm not talking of fully online. We have opted more for the blended approach. That is, we will maintain. We cannot move all our programs. We have more than 230 programs that we offer. All of a sudden, move all of them to the blended mode. That is not possible. So we will do it gradually, but we have already this year we have had this year 50% of our programs that will move to the blended mode. And we think that that will benefit the students. That will also encourage international recruitment. And that will also encourage international partnerships. We already have a number of interesting partnerships with universities around the world, where we're developing programs that where we do not necessarily have all the expertise in-house. So I think that will facilitate that transition. Where we will be having, we can have online delivery from the universities we work with, and have the blended, more kind of, blended approach with the students coming to the university on the different programs that we have with our partners.
Thanks, Prof. Jerry. What you're saying resonates quite a lot with our thinking at the University of Johannesburg. And we've actually seen the students be very successful during this last semester in lockdown. One student laughingly said it was because we couldn't go out, Prof. We had nothing else to do, so we had to study. But our research is actually showing that the reason students are doing better is because of the accessibility to education, because a lot of information was really right there at their fingertips. Erik, I wonder if you, from a business perspective and from a sort of perspective of a futurist thinker, wants to come in and give some ideas about where you think universities are going in the online space, perhaps thinking about Google and its universities?
Yeah, I think, so first off, just to echo what Prof. Yuri was saying, is that I think the hybrid model is definitely where it's at. And that we've seen, as much as we love online and as much as we love the accessibility and the ease of it, that it can never replace what it feels like to be a part of a group in person. Like a lot of the stuff that I do online as well, I've now facilitated back to in person, because we need that sort of interaction with people around us. So I think the hybrid model is definitely the way to go. But what's really been great about the past few months is the acceleration and the adoption of new technology. When I think about when I was doing webinars, and I've been doing webinars for years, the show up rate before was nowhere, no one would attend. And now all of a sudden everyone knows how to Zoom, and everyone knows how to do breakout groups and all these kind of things. So we just become so comfortable with it so quickly. And because of that, it just opened up this entire new world to us. So I think what happens also moving forward is that we see many more partnerships between businesses and universities, where we create these sort of online academies with access to thinkers all over the world, because that's the biggest benefit, perhaps, is that we just aren't trapped by geography anymore. Those are kind of the first few thoughts that just pop up for me.
Okay, thank you. Then to you, Prof. Jerry, we have a question. You were talking about preparing students for the future. So what are some of the practical things that students and libraries could do in order to prepare students for the jobs that don't yet exist?
I think that, the traditional universities have been focusing too much on the knowledge aspect. I think it is important that this is what we're talking about skills. How do we develop the skills? And the skills are not just necessarily the kind of skills that will help them secure a job, but the kind of skills also that will help them thrive throughout their employment career. And I'm talking here of also, in addition to the soft skills, I'm also talking of skills related to attitude, for example. All those are, I think, very important. We're no longer talking of just the kind of knowledge that people need to have, and they get it from books. We're talking of how people can use knowledge and apply the knowledge. So this is where, for example, at the university, we're encouraging more of guest lecturing from industry people to come over. When we switched to the learner-centered credit system, we have 30 hours of contact hours for lectures and tutorials, and another 15 hours of independent learning, where students are called upon to work on case studies, develop their skills on problem solving. I think all these are very important. And of course, we assume that students during all that they're doing have fully developed all the digital literacy, all the digital skills that will help them, in the future career. Why do we do that? Because we know that nobody will stay in a job. It is already the case, and they will not stay in the same job all the time. They will change 6-7 times throughout the whole career. So it's not training people to get a job. It's training people to be able to, thrive through their employment career. This is what we're trying to do. I would stress also on the values that we need to inculcate. I alluded in what I say to the SDGs. I truly believe in the SDGs, and I truly believe that no one can leave the university without having got something to do with the SDGs in any form, whatever. But be conscious of the SDGs. And I am promoting, a kind of a module, online module, and this is where, for example, you asked me the question about libraries. I flagged that idea at an international forum that was led by the UN, and I proposed that we could have a kind of a module for the SDGs, an initiation module that would be taken by students all over the world. And that will be prepared by a group of people all over the world. So, everybody gets to have the same kinds of knowledge. This is partnership, and this is initiating people also to the SDGs. And that could be something important where we can inculcate values.
Thank you so much, Prof. Jure. The next question is a question for me, and I'm going to take it because it builds on to what Prof. Jure has just been saying. The question is, do you see the crisis changing the way teams and organizations operate going forward? And what would you say are some of the things we have to let go of, if any? Now, this is a bit of a pet topic for me, because I think we need to let go of some of our quite entrenched ways of thinking about what and how we teach at a university. Before I joined the library, I was a professor in world religions, and I'm particularly interested in teaching and learning. The University of Johannesburg, we say our motto is learning to be. So learning to be an accountant, a psychologist. Well, I actually think that's quite outdated. We need to let go of that, because people are not going to be an accountant for the rest of their lives. We need to teach people how to use their device to find information, analyze information, and learn what to do with it. And that's why I'm a librarian, or why I work in the library, because that's the cutting edge, I think, of this new world in which we are going to have to think quite differently about what and how we teach. So we've got time for one more question, and it's a question for you, Erik. Sorry, I just need to find it. How can a university or an organization redesign and reimagine education and skill systems to meet future needs?
My one good friend, John Sane, always talks about this idea that we have to create today and tomorrow teams. And what he's trying to say is that the teams that we have today are the teams that help us to run the organization. And the teams that we have, that's the tomorrow teams, are the ones that help us just to see around the corner. And ultimately what it comes down to is that we have to get the right people in. And so partly what that means is, how does an organization become desirable enough to attract the best talent, to attract people who will be able to solve those complex problems for us? And I think a big part of that is that we have to create an organization where people can experiment, where they can come into our organization and try new things and fail at it and be okay. And we are always moving forward and always pushing the boundary. And I love what you said about learning to be. But I almost think that when I initially heard it, I thought, okay, I love that, until it was narrowed down into learn to be an accountant or learn to be, but learning to be, like learning to be how we exist in this world. I mean, that's just phenomenal, you know?
That's exactly how I saw it. So as a scholar of world religion, when I first read this, I thought, oh, this is so fabulous. You know, it's like learning to be. That's what I'm all about. And then I realized I wasn't quite that.
But and so that's exactly, I think, you know, when you become the organization that is actually learning to be, and where people can become, you know, you attract the kind of client or the kinds of talent, people that help you to build that kind of organization.
Right, guys, that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much for a wonderful session that has really taken us from a world view of universities down to the libraries and then to the individual person, and how we lead our organizations and ourselves through the contemporary world. And that's probably going to continue to be a world that is rather chaotic and sometimes in crisis.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.